You and fans of the framework. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, today I wanted to share a little bit of our insight and wisdom that we've generated along the way for the last 16 years when we've been working with organizations to figure out some things related to compensation, feedback systems, and goal systems because they all kind of get connected together and blended together. And this question about how we may or may not combine our pay or compensation, philosophies with our goal setting cycle and philosophies, with our feedback cycle, that they can all get a little bit complicated and muddy and figure out how do we, bring them all together. But in particular, I wanted to focus on some things that we see related to pay for performance. So I want to go back 16 years in my career when I was working for an organization where we were going through the planning phase of a big transformational change. And at that time, we had a merit pay system. And it was based on problem number one here. It was based on a subjective evaluation system. So there was a merit pay system, which is objective, an objective decision or calculation regarding bonus pay, and that the basis for that was an objective evaluation, or a subjective evaluation. So that's problem number one. So I'll explain why this is a problem. So what was happening was that because there was all this subjective criteria that employees were evaluated on, and then there was a subjective rating scale, 1 to 6, and there was a meaning behind all of those ratings, and then, the leader went through all those subjective assessment things, gave a rating to the employee, and then that turned into a score, and that score turned into a merit pay amount. And so based on that subjective tool and the subjective rating system, what was happening was there was discrepancies, right? So the criteria was subjective, the rating scale was subjective, so leaders had a lot of leeway into how they, administered that tool. But in the end, it led to merit pay. And the problem may not be so much about the idea of who got, how much money was expended in merit pay, but the problem was what was being rewarded. And the problem is that leaders were overrating. So the problem was the subjective tool linked to merit pay led to overrating. So leaders were overrating their employees on their behavior and their performance, and they were scoring it that way, giving that feedback in a formal way during an evaluation process, and then dollars were also being rewarded to the employee for that higher overrating. So what was happening, and the problem that this caused, was that leaders were reinforcing behavior or performance that wasn't maybe at standard. And so the organization's results overall and its culture and behavior and attitudes overall were not really that great. And part of the problem that created that and kept it going was that leaders were overrating in the formal feedback system using this subjective tool that then was linked to pay and reward. So what was being reinforced was the current behavior was being reinforced. It wasn't going to improve. Why would people improve it? They were already being overrated, so they didn't have an incentive to improve. So that was problem number one, is the subjectiveness of the tool, and the problem that because it was linked to pay, people were overrated, so leaders could give their employees a higher raise or didn't have to deal with the issue of not giving them a higher raise. So, and there was an example of that, of one department that was just so glaring to me when we caught on to this, was that, this one leader was overrating for several years all of his employees, yet that department had the lowest employee engagement in the building, had the highest turnover, had the lowest patient satisfaction of all the departments that were surveyed, had problems with, compliance issues with, surveys and things like that. So financial performance, they were over on budget. So here's a department that all of their results were underperforming, yet on the evaluation, everyone got really high overrated marks and then got higher raises. So what was being rewarded, right? So no wonder they didn't improve, and year after year, the results continued to be, really, really low, yet everybody kept getting really high evaluations and high merit pay increases, and that went on for years. And so that's problem number one with merit pay, is it can lead to overrating, especially if there's subjectivity in the rating scale, which, you know what, there probably always is going to be that. Because when you're giving employees feedback on, through a formal feedback process, you're probably going to give them feedback on their behavior and their job task performance, and it's really hard not to have that be in some way subjective, right? It's really hard to objectively measure behavior or sometimes job task performance. So there's probably always going to be some subjectivity in a feedback process. So again, if you're going to link that to pay, you're always going to have this problem with subjectivity. So that's problem number one. So in our journey, 16, winding back the clock 16 plus years ago, and we were uncovering this problem with our feedback system linked to our merit pay system, we thought, well, let's make the feedback system more objective, and that will solve this problem or help solve this problem. So we did turn 60% of the annual evaluation into more objective, findings, which were related to measurable goals for the department and the organization. So we thought that, well, by making 60% of the evaluation objective related to goals, then 40% was still based on behavior and job task performance. That was still going to kind of be subjective, but we were going to try to really, shore that up with some good criteria of how that was measured and rated, and consistency and fairness across that. So we went in that direction. But then what happened there, the problem that resulted was that leaders then, and employees, because they were engaged in the goal setting process, started to set softer goals. Gosh, so now we've got a new problem, right? So we have the subjectivity and the overrating problem, and now we have, the under reaching goals. So now we've got this new problem that is created for trying to design a feedback system that now incorporated objective things like measurable goals, and now we've created this new problem, which is setting soft goals or easy goals. And so that kind of was the next evolution of trying to get to linking a more objective feedback system to merit pay, so that it would be a more fair and just system. So so that happened, and so then some work came out by Dan Pink. Maybe you've seen it, and you might want to look up his work. I think it's really good. He has an RSN, I think it's called RSA Animate video. Maybe I'll link it up in the comments here, regarding what motivates people, right? What motivates, and is money a reward or is it a motivator? And when we work with our partner organizations and we're strategizing with them around this, we've always kind of left it up to our partners to decide what's in their value system, what's their philosophies, and we didn't want to push our values or philosophies on them related to merit pay or no merit pay. But I would say right now, if somebody asked me, personally, if I got to decide, this is what I would decide. Okay, this is what I would decide. Well, first, let's go back to a third problem. So first problem, subjectivity, and linking it to something objective like pay, and the unfairness that employees perceive, and the overrating that causes poor behavior performance to continue because it's being reinforced and rewarded. And then number two is setting soft goals, if goals are linked to the evaluation system that's used for distributing the merit pay and deciding the merit pay. But there's another thing too is, boy, I just discovered this one not too long ago, is that I was in an employee focus group and they teed me off to this. And then I kind of prodded a little bit in other groups with leaders and employees in that same organization. And it was related to the amount of time and energy that was being wasted in the organization, related to the methodology used for either setting goals that were included in the merit pay system or just the merit pay system and calculation itself. And employees and leaders not understanding, not liking, not knowing how to win or succeed, etc. So, I mean, one employee said to me, our department has spent the last 6 months with, lots of negative energy and infighting and squabbles around how our goals were going to be measured and how they were going to fit into our merit pay compensation. And we could have used all that time and energy to put towards actually working on accomplishing the goal. So it robbed the organization, it robbed the people of time and energy and focus on the action plan, creating the action plan and executing the action plan to achieve the goal. They spent 6 months in this internal turmoil, so of no great benefit to them or the organization, doing this kind of, infighting regarding confusing methodology or goals and understanding. So that's a third problem that we've uncovered as well. So I was on a phone call with one of our partners earlier this week on this topic, and we were talking about, in particular, their evaluation system, the next phase of, improvement in their evaluation system, and then, this question about will it or will it not be linked to merit pay. And, so since there's these problems, of course, their question was, well, what do you recommend? And so, like I said, I guess my real recommendation, right now, after the last 16 years of kind of observing and watching and seeing these problems playing out, I think this is really the coaching and strategist advice I would like to give on this topic to organizations is, really there's 3 core systems at play here when we talk about this subject of merit pay. And number 1 is your pay and compensation system, okay? So when you talk about, focusing in on a pay and compensation system, I would say before you even think about linking, pay to performance, get your pay and compensation system squared around. Because in many organizations, there's problems, with just their core pay systems related to whether it's internal equity or external equity or both, okay? So before you think about how we're gonna, add on some sort of, additional compensation for pay for performance, and that's gonna be part of how we decide where your pay goes next or how bonuses or whatever, I would say just shore up your pay systems. Make sure that, you understand your internal equity, your external equity, and that those are fair and just. And get those systems just shored up and consider that in its own little focus to get that shored up. Number 2 is your goal cycle. Get your goal cycle shored up. All of those great things related to a goal cycle, narrow the focus, organization goals, 1 for each major strategy of the organization, but usually between 3 to 7, 2 to 3 department level goals aligned with that, quarterly action plans, monitoring the metrics, adjusting the plan. Get that goal cycle figured out and working where you have stretch goals, things that aren't soft goals, easy goals. Just, get that goal cycle shored up. And then thirdly, shore up your feedback systems. So your annual performance evaluation, mid-year conversations, your daily direct dialogue and positive coaching, all those things. Get your feedback system shored up. So get your pay systems and compensation systems shored up with internal and external equity. Get your goal cycle to be robust and solid with, stretch goals for the organization level and aligned and cascaded to the department level, and then get your feedback systems really in place so that you're giving honest, timely, comprehensive feedback related to how people behave, perform, and contribute. And once you get those three systems shored up, then talk about merit pay and how we may or may not include our goals, and giving pay for performance for goal achievement versus and linking that to our feedback system through our annual evaluation process. So I would say it's really hard to link these things together until you get each one of these systems working very good. And in the case of the organization that I worked with, we went through this process to try to develop a more objective evaluation system so that it seemed more fair and just to link it to a merit pay system. And in the end, we never did link it back together because we didn't need to. We found other ways that if there was profit to be distributed, after a financially great year, we figured out another way to do that and do it in a way that felt more like a reward versus a motivator or incentive, which really isn't the case for complex works and organizations. And I thought about, how do for-profit business, because all but one of the partners that we work with are not-for-profit organizations. So I was thinking, how does for-profit businesses deal with this idea of, profit sharing? Let's just call it that instead of pay for performance. Let's talk about profit sharing. And really, it's about, how many shares do you own, and then, distributing that to shareholders. And I got to thinking about, organizations thinking about our employees as shareholders, and thinking about them as stakeholders, and thinking about fair distribution of excess profit. Of course, if you're a not-for-profit, you need some of that, or most of that, maybe all of that excess profit to put back into your business to serve your mission and your community, who is your real owners. But yeah, I was contemplating that, and I guess that's where organizations have to think about, what are their philosophies regarding that. If there is profit in a not-for-profit organization, where the stakeholders are the community members, not the employees, they are, part of it, but they're not all of it, then you got to think, okay, how do we fairly distribute that money? And I remember one time in the organization that I worked, how they did it was based on, we had great internal and external equity in our pay systems. We got that shored up, and it did take some money and some time to get that shored up. So maybe your excess profit needs to go into shoring that up first and making sure there's good pay structures in place, that you can recruit people, you can retain people, that there's great systems and ability to keep up with the cost of living for your people that work for you. And then if there is more, it could be distributed in a way maybe how we did it one time was based on hours worked. So, that way there was a certain set amount for each hour worked in the last year in which that extra profit was generated. And so, if you were a person that worked 400 this year, or you were a person that worked, 80 hours this year, it kind of made it a fair distribution, almost like how many shares did you own, how many hours did you work, and that's how the calculation was done. So there's probably lots of ways to think about that, but I think before you even start thinking about that as an organization, I'd really want to make sure that your pay and compensation systems had good internal and external equity for day-to-day compensation, and then your goal system really shored up, and then your feedback system is really shored up, and then you can talk about how to reward people and groups with excess profits. So there you go. The problems with linking pay to performance and the challenges that we face in organizations, and maybe a little uniquely different in not-for-profit organizations. So I'd love to hear your comments and feedback regarding this. I think, pay is often a sensitive issue with folks. It can be a private or sensitive issue with a lot of people. But it's also one of those things that we see rated often very low on the employee engagement surveys is, the employee's satisfaction with the payment systems. And I don't think a merit pay system is necessarily the answer to that. I think the first answer to that is making sure we have good internal and external equity with our compensation systems in general. And then once we shore that up, then we can decide what to do with pay for performance. So there you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on this. Maybe you have some unique experiences or ideas or thoughts or opinions on this. If so, please share them in the comments. I'm going to link up that Dan Pink video in the comments about what motivates us. And that kind of talks about, complicated systems related to pay. And then also, please put in the comments. You've probably seen it that we have a webinar coming up on strengthening the leadership in small organizations. So if you haven't registered for that, we got a nice turnout for that. But there's still time to register for that. That's coming up next week on February 20th. And also go to capstoneleadership.net. If you want to check out our other services, we got upcoming events where registration is going on for our public training events. Also, if you're interested in understanding more about how we work individually with individual leaders, and or if you're interested in learning how we work with entire organizations, the best way to kind of figure that out about whether or not it would be a good fit for us to work together would be to just schedule a call, and there's a place to do that on our website. Again, that's capstoneleadership.net. So thanks everyone for your time and attention today, and I'd love to hear in the comments your thought on this this kind of sensitive topic about pay. All right, bye guys.